Before we get into the story, leave a comment and let us know what city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10 at the end. Enjoy the story. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the small apartment as Sarah pressed herself against the bathroom door, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Through the thin wood, she could hear Marcus's heavy footsteps pacing the living room, his voice slurred with alcohol as he continued his tirade about her supposed failures as a wife. The familiar pattern had escalated again, and this time, Sarah knew something had to change. At 28, Sarah had spent the last 5 years walking on eggshells, making excuses for bruises, and believing Marcus's promises that things would get better. She had isolated herself from friends and family, convinced by his manipulation that she was lucky anyone would tolerate her. But tonight, as she sat on the cold bathroom floor with a split lip and a bruise forming on her cheek, clarity cut through the fog of fear and self-doubt. She quietly opened the medicine cabinet and retrieved the small envelope she had hidden behind the aspirin bottle. Inside were 5 crumpled $20 bills, her secret savings from the grocery money Marcus gave her each week. $100 total, money she had been setting aside $5 at a time for months, never knowing when she might need it. Tonight, she knew that time had come. The apartment fell silent, and Sarah held her breath. She heard the familiar creak of the couch springs as Marcus collapsed onto it, probably passing out as he often did after his rages. She waited another hour, counting each minute on her watch, before carefully turning the door handle. The living room was dark except for the glow of the television, and Marcus was sprawled across the couch, snoring heavily. Moving with practiced silence, Sarah gathered a few essential items into a small backpack: a change of clothes, her identification documents that she had hidden from Marcus months ago, and the precious envelope of money. She couldn't take much without risking waking him, but these few things would have to be enough. As she passed through the kitchen, she grabbed a bottle of water and a granola bar, knowing she had no idea when her next meal might come. Standing at the front door, Sarah's hand trembled on the handle. This wasn't the first time she had considered leaving, but it was the first time she felt she had the courage to actually do it. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the windows, and she knew Marcus would sleep for several more hours. This was her window, perhaps her only chance. The hallway of their apartment building felt different as she walked through it, knowing she might never see it again. Mrs. Chen from 2B was getting her morning newspaper and offered a worried smile when she saw Sarah's face. Sarah had always suspected the elderly woman knew what was happening behind their door, but like so many neighbors in similar situations, she had never known how to help. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and Sarah walked quickly, her backpack feeling heavier with each step. She had no specific destination in mind, only the knowledge that she needed to get as far away as possible with the little money she had. The morning air was crisp against her injured face, and despite everything, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. At the bus stop, Sarah studied the route map with growing anxiety. Even the cheapest fare would take a significant portion of her money, and she had no idea where she could go with what little remained. She had burned bridges with most of her family and friends during her years with Marcus, either through his manipulation or her own shame about her situation. The women's shelter was an option, but it was across town, and the bus fare there would leave her with almost nothing. When the bus arrived, Sarah hesitated at the bottom of the steps. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying temples, noticed her hesitation and the obvious signs of her ordeal. He had been driving this route for 15 years and had learned to recognize the look of someone running from something. Without saying a word, he waited patiently as Sarah fumbled in her backpack for her money. As she counted out the exact fare with shaking hands, one of the $20 bills fluttered to the ground. Sarah's heart sank as she watched her precious money blow across the sidewalk. Before she could react, the bus driver had stepped down and retrieved it, handing it back to her with a gentle smile that held no judgment, only understanding. The bus driver, whose name tag read William, returned to his seat and closed the doors behind Sarah. As she fumbled for the correct change, counting and recounting the precious bills with trembling fingers, she felt the weight of other passengers' curious stares. The morning commuters were mostly dressed for office jobs, carrying coffee cups and briefcases, living lives that seemed impossibly normal and stable from where Sarah stood. "Take your time," William said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that Sarah hadn't heard from anyone in years. There was something about his tone that reminded her of her grandfather, who had always made her feel safe as a child. "Where are you headed this morning?" Sarah's mind raced. She hadn't thought beyond getting on the bus, beyond putting distance between herself and Marcus. The shelter was across town, but admitting that felt like announcing her situation to everyone within earshot. "Downtown," she said quietly, hoping that would be enough. William nodded and adjusted his rearview mirror slightly. "That'll be $3, he said, though Sarah was certain the posted fare was higher. She didn't question it, grateful for any small mercy. As she counted out the money, William noticed how carefully she handled each bill, as if her life depended on every dollar. Sarah made her way to a seat near the middle of the bus, choosing a spot where she could keep her head down but still watch the door. Years of living with Marcus had taught her to always have an escape route, to always be aware of her surroundings. The bus lurched forward, and Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror as they pulled away from her neighborhood. The other passengers gradually returned to their morning routines, checking phones and reading newspapers. Sarah caught fragments of conversations about weekend plans and work meetings, casual complaints about traffic and weather. These people were discussing their lives as if they had control over them, as if their biggest worry was whether to grab lunch at the new deli or if their presentation would go well. The normalcy of it all felt foreign to Sarah, like observing life through a window. As the bus made its stops, Sarah watched the neighborhoods change outside the window. They passed through areas she recognized from her childhood, places that held memories of a time before Marcus, before she had learned to make herself smaller and quieter. There was the park where she used to read on Sunday afternoons, the library where she had spent countless hours before Marcus convinced her that education was a waste of time for someone like her. At a red light, Sarah caught William's eyes in the rearview mirror. He wasn't staring, but there was a quality of attention in his gaze that felt protective rather than intrusive. When their eyes met, he offered another small smile, the kind that said, "I see you, and you're going to be okay," without requiring any response from her. The bus filled and emptied at various stops, but Sarah remained in her seat, uncertain of her destination. Each mile put more distance between her and Marcus, but it also took her further into an unknown future with only $97 to her name. She had no job, no place to stay, and no idea how to rebuild a life she had allowed to be systematically dismantled over the course of 5 years. A mother with 2 young children boarded at the next stop, and Sarah watched as the woman effortlessly managed diaper bags and strollers while keeping her children calm and happy. The sight filled Sarah with a complex mixture of emotions. She and Marcus had talked about children early in their relationship, but as his controlling behavior escalated, Sarah had quietly taken steps to prevent pregnancy. Some part of her had known, even then, that bringing a child into their toxic environment would have been cruel. The older child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 4, caught Sarah's eye and waved shyly. Sarah managed a small wave back, and the simple interaction brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her with such uncomplicated friendliness. The little girl's mother noticed the exchange and offered Sarah a sympathetic smile, perhaps recognizing the signs of someone who needed kindness. As they approached downtown, Sarah realized she needed to make a decision. The women's shelter would be safe, but it would also mean admitting the full extent of her situation to strangers, undergoing intake processes, and facing the reality of starting over with absolutely nothing. Part of her wondered if she was being dramatic, if she should return home and try to work things out with Marcus one more time. William's voice came over the intercom, announcing the next stop. Downtown terminal. This stop. Transfer opportunities to all major routes. Sarah gripped her backpack tighter, knowing that this was likely where she needed to get off. The terminal would have information about city services, including directions to the women's shelter and other resources she might need. As the bus slowed, William caught her eye in the mirror again. This time, his expression was more serious, as if he could sense her uncertainty and the weight of the decision she was facing. Without saying anything directly, he seemed to be communicating that whatever choice she made, she wasn't alone in making it. The downtown terminal buzzed with activity as Sarah stepped off the bus, her legs unsteady after the long ride. The morning rush was in full swing, with commuters hurrying in every direction, their footsteps echoing off the high ceilings of the transit building. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the sheer number of people, the noise, and the sense of urgency that seemed to permeate the air around her. She found a quiet corner near a bank of payphones and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her backpack. Months ago, during one of Marcus's calmer periods, she had secretly copied down the address and phone number of the local women's shelter from a brochure she had found at the doctor's office. The paper was worn from being folded and unfolded countless times, a tangible reminder of all the occasions she had considered leaving, but couldn't find the courage. Standing in the terminal, Sarah tried to orient herself. The shelter was across town, requiring another bus transfer and additional fare. She counted her money again, calculating how much she would have left after transportation. The math was sobering. Even if she made it to the shelter, she would arrive with less than $90 to her name, with no job prospects, and a face that clearly showed she was running from trouble. A security guard noticed Sarah standing alone, looking lost and injured, and approached with professional concern. "Miss, are you all right? Do you need assistance with anything?" His voice was kind, but official, and Sarah felt a spike of panic. What if Marcus had already discovered she was gone? What if he had somehow tracked her here? "I'm fine," Sarah said quickly, though her voice shook slightly. "Just figuring out my route." The guard nodded but lingered nearby, clearly concerned about her visible injuries. Sarah realized that her bruises made her memorable, potentially making it easier for Marcus to track her if he came looking. The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. She made her way to the route maps posted near the ticket windows, trying to trace the path to the women's shelter. The bus system was more complex than she had realized, requiring multiple transfers and precise timing. One missed connection could leave her stranded in an unfamiliar neighborhood with limited funds and nowhere to go. As Sarah studied the maps, she became aware of someone standing beside her. She turned to see William, the bus driver from her earlier ride, checking what appeared to be a work schedule in his hands. He had changed out of his uniform and was wearing civilian clothes, but his kind eyes were unmistakable. "Finding your way around?" he asked casually, as if their meeting was purely coincidental. Sarah wondered if drivers often ended up at the terminal during their breaks, or if he had specifically sought her out. Either way, his presence felt reassuring rather than threatening. "Yes, just trying to get to." Sarah hesitated, unsure how much she wanted to reveal to this stranger, no matter how kind he seemed. "Trying to get across town." She gestured vaguely at the map, hoping he wouldn't press for specifics. William studied the routes over her shoulder, and Sarah caught a faint scent of coffee and something else, something clean and comforting that reminded her of safety. "That's quite a journey from here," he observed. "Multiple transfers, and the timing can be tricky if you're not familiar with the system." The weight of the day began to settle on Sarah's shoulders. The adrenaline that had carried her through her escape was fading, replaced by exhaustion and the overwhelming reality of her situation. She had left everything she knew, as toxic as it was, for complete uncertainty. The magnitude of that decision suddenly felt crushing. "Are you sure you're okay?" William asked, his voice gentle but concerned. "You look like you might need a place to sit down." There was something in his tone that suggested he understood more about her situation than she had revealed. His concern felt genuine, not intrusive. Sarah's legs did feel unsteady, and she realized she hadn't eaten anything substantial since the previous day. The granola bar in her backpack suddenly seemed inadequate for the challenges ahead. "I'm just tired," she admitted, allowing herself this small admission of vulnerability. William glanced around the busy terminal, then back at Sarah. "There's a quiet cafe around the corner, if you need a few minutes to collect yourself." Sometimes it helps to sit down and think through your next steps when you're facing a big decision. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Whatever situation brought you here this morning, you should know that there are people who can help." The kindness in his voice nearly brought Sarah to tears. After years of Marcus's manipulation and isolation, genuine human compassion felt almost foreign. She had forgotten that strangers could be concerned for her welfare without wanting something in return, that not everyone saw her vulnerability as an opportunity to exploit. "I don't know if I can afford a cafe," Sarah said quietly, the admission embarrassing but necessary. Every dollar mattered now, and she couldn't waste money on luxuries like coffee when she didn't know where her next meal would come from. William's expression softened further, if that was possible. "Consider it my treat," he said simply. "Everyone deserves a warm cup of coffee and a safe place to think when they're facing uncertainty. No strings attached, just one human being helping another." Sarah looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of the manipulation she had learned to expect from men. But William's gaze was steady and honest, holding no hidden agenda that she could detect. After years of Marcus's psychological games, she had become adept at reading the subtle signs of controlling behavior, and she sensed none of them in William. The cafe William led her to was a small, family-owned establishment, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. The morning rush had passed, leaving the space quiet and peaceful, with only a few customers reading newspapers or working on laptops at scattered tables. The walls were decorated with local artwork, and soft jazz played in the background, creating an atmosphere that felt worlds away from the chaos of Sarah's morning. William gestured to a table near the window, where Sarah could sit with her back to the wall and keep an eye on the entrance. She realized he had instinctively chosen a spot that would make her feel secure, another small kindness that didn't go unnoticed. As they settled into their seats, Sarah kept her backpack on her lap, unwilling to let her few possessions out of her immediate control. "What can I get you?" asked the barista, a young woman with a warm smile and paint-stained apron, who looked like she might be an art student. Sarah hesitated, overwhelmed by the simple act of being asked what she wanted. Marcus had made most decisions for her over the years, from what she ate to what she wore, and the freedom to choose felt both liberating and terrifying. "Just coffee, please," Sarah said softly, still not comfortable with William's offer to pay. The barista waited patiently, sensing there might be more to the order. William stepped in gently. "How about some of those pastries? They look fresh, and you probably haven't eaten much today." He wasn't pushing, just offering, and Sarah realized he was right. Her stomach had been in knots for hours, but now that the immediate danger had passed, hunger was beginning to surface. "The cranberry scones are excellent," the barista added encouragingly. "My mom makes them fresh every morning." Something about the mention of a mother's cooking touched Sarah deeply, reminding her of her own mother's kitchen before their relationship had been poisoned by Marcus's manipulation. Sarah nodded, allowing herself this small comfort. As the barista prepared their order, William settled back in his chair, radiating the kind of calm presence that Sarah hadn't experienced in years. He didn't bombard her with questions or demand explanations for her obvious distress. Instead, he simply existed in the space with her, offering his quiet support. "You've been driving buses for a long time?" Sarah asked, needing to focus on something other than her own situation for a moment. Small talk felt rusty, like a skill she had lost through years of walking on eggshells around Marcus. 15 years, William replied, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Started right after my wife passed away. Needed something that would keep me busy, help me feel useful." There was a note of old sadness in his voice, but also acceptance and peace. Sarah found herself curious about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "I'm sorry for your loss," Sarah said, meaning it. She had become accustomed to offering condolences to others, while her own life fell apart in private. But this felt different. This felt like a genuine connection between two people who had both experienced pain. William smiled softly. "Thank you. Margaret would have liked you, I think. She always had a soft spot for people who were struggling, always bringing home strays and lost souls." He paused, then added, "She used to say that kindness was the one thing in the world that multiplied when you shared it." The scone arrived warm and fragrant, and Sarah discovered she was hungrier than she had realized. The simple act of eating something her body needed felt like a small rebellion against years of Marcus controlling even her basic needs. William watched with quiet satisfaction as she ate, like someone who understood the importance of small victories. "The shelter you're trying to reach," William said carefully. "It's a good place. I've dropped people there before, and the staff really cares about helping women get back on their feet." Sarah looked up, surprised by his directness, but also relieved that she didn't have to keep pretending about her destination. "You knew?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. William had the kind of perceptive kindness that came from years of observing human nature and caring about the people he encountered. "I've been driving these routes long enough to recognize someone who's running towards safety rather than running away from responsibility," he said gently. "There's a difference in the way people carry themselves, the way they protect their few belongings, the way they plan their next steps." Sarah felt tears threatening again, but this time they came from relief rather than despair. Being seen and understood without judgment felt like a gift she hadn't known she needed. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," she admitted, voicing the fear that had been growing stronger with each mile away from Marcus. "Strength isn't about never being afraid," William said, his voice filled with conviction. "It's about doing the right thing despite being terrified. You got on that bus this morning when staying would have been easier. You chose your safety over your comfort. That takes tremendous courage." The words settled into Sarah's heart like balm on a wound. For so long, Marcus had convinced her that she was weak, that she was lucky to have him despite her countless flaws. Hearing someone else define strength in terms of her own actions felt revolutionary. "The thing about starting over," William continued, "is that it feels impossible until you realize you've already begun. You're not the same woman who got on my bus this morning. You're someone who chose herself, chose safety, chose the possibility of something better." Sarah wiped her eyes with a napkin, grateful for this stranger's wisdom. Outside the cafe window, the city continued its daily rhythm, people going about their lives unaware of the quiet transformation happening at a corner table. For the first time in years, Sarah began to believe that she might have a future worth fighting for. As they finished their coffee, William glanced at his watch and frowned slightly. "I hate to rush you, but I have something I need to take care of before my next shift starts." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Would you mind if I gave you a ride to the shelter?" "It would save you the bus fare and the complicated transfers." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. Marcus had taught her to be suspicious of men offering help, insisting that everyone had ulterior motives. But looking at William's genuine expression, she found herself wanting to trust him. Still, the years of conditioning made her hesitate. "I understand if you'd prefer not to," William said, reading her uncertainty. "After what you've been through, trusting a stranger probably feels risky. But I want you to know that my offer comes with no expectations or strings attached. I have a daughter about your age, and I would hope someone would help her if she ever found herself in a similar situation." The mention of his daughter touched something deep in Sarah's heart. She thought of her own father, who had died when she was in college, before he could meet Marcus. Sometimes she wondered if having a protective father figure in her life might have helped her recognize the warning signs earlier. "Are you sure it's not too much trouble?" Sarah asked, her practical side recognizing the value of preserving her remaining money. The bus fare to the shelter would have taken nearly $15, money she desperately needed for other necessities. "No trouble at all," William assured her. "My car's parked just a few blocks away." He stood and left a generous tip for the barista, who smiled and wished them both a good day. As they prepared to leave, Sarah realized this small cafe had become a turning point for her, a place where kindness had restored some of her faith in humanity. Walking through the downtown streets, Sarah noticed details she had missed during her panicked arrival at the terminal. There were people going about their normal days, but there were also others who looked like they might be struggling. A homeless man asking for change, a woman with tired eyes waiting at a bus stop with several children, a teenager who looked like he might be sleeping rough. Sarah realized she was joining a community of people who had fallen through society's cracks, but who were still fighting to survive. William's car was a modest sedan, clean but well-used, with a small photo of a young woman taped to the dashboard. "That's my daughter, Emma," he explained, noticing Sarah's glance. "She's a teacher now, working with kids in the inner city. She gets her compassion from her mother." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah felt a pang of longing for the kind of unconditional parental love she had lost when her father died. As they drove through the city, William pointed out various landmarks and resources. "There's a community center that offers job training programs," he mentioned, indicating a building they passed. "And that clinic provides free healthcare services. The shelter will have information about all of these places, but it helps to know they exist." Sarah watched the neighborhoods change as they traveled, noting the gradual shift from the commercial downtown area to more residential streets. Some areas looked prosperous and well-maintained, while others showed signs of economic struggle. She wondered where she would fit in this new landscape, what kind of life she might be able to build for herself. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said, finding her voice. "Why are you helping me? I mean, really helping me, not just being polite." She had been wondering about his motivations, trying to understand why a stranger would go so far out of his way for someone he barely knew. William was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "About 10 years ago, I picked up a young woman on my route who reminded me of Emma. She was running from an abusive situation, scared and alone, with almost nothing to her name." He paused at a red light and turned to look at Sarah. "I gave her my card and told her to call if she ever needed anything, but I never heard from her again." The light turned green, and they continued driving. "Last year, I got a letter from her. She had finished college, gotten married to a good man, and was working as a social worker, helping other women in similar situations. She said that one act of kindness from a stranger had shown her that she deserved better, that there were people in the world who would help without expecting anything in return." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears again. "So you're hoping I'll write you a letter in 10 years?" William chuckled softly. "I'm hoping you'll find your way to a life that makes you happy and safe. Whether you ever think of me again is irrelevant. What matters is that you know your life has value, that you deserve kindness and respect, and that this terrible chapter you're leaving behind doesn't define your entire story. They pulled into the parking lot of a modest building, surrounded by well-maintained gardens. A small sign identified it as New Beginnings Women's Center. The building looked welcoming rather than institutional, with flower boxes in the windows and a playground visible in the backyard. Sarah realized they had arrived at her destination, and suddenly the reality of her situation hit her with full force. "This is it," William said gently, parking near the main entrance. "Are you ready?" Sarah looked at the building that would become her temporary home, her first step toward independence, and felt a mixture of terror and anticipation. Everything in her life was about to change, and there was no going back. Sarah sat in the passenger seat for a moment, gathering her courage as she stared at the entrance to New Beginnings Women's Center. The building looked welcoming enough, but crossing that threshold would make her situation official. She would no longer be a woman having a bad day who could theoretically return home. She would be a domestic violence survivor seeking refuge, joining the statistics she had always believed applied to other people. "Take your time," William said softly, making no move to rush her. "There's no shame in needing a moment to prepare yourself." His patience reminded Sarah of her grandfather again, the way he used to let her sit on his porch and work through her childhood problems at her own pace. Through the large windows of the center, Sarah could see a reception area with comfortable furniture and children's toys scattered on a colorful rug. A woman with graying hair and a warm smile was talking to a young mother, while a toddler played nearby. The scene looked normal, almost domestic, which somehow made it less frightening. "What if they ask questions I'm not ready to answer?" Sarah asked, voicing one of her many fears. The intake process at a shelter would undoubtedly require her to relive details of her relationship with Marcus, to put into words things she had barely admitted to herself. "They'll only ask what they need to know to help you," William assured her. "These people understand trauma, and they won't push you faster than you're able to go. Their job is to make you feel safe, not to make you relive your worst moments." He had clearly spoken with staff at places like this before, either through his volunteer work or his experiences helping other women in similar situations. Sarah took a deep breath and reached for the door handle, then paused again. "William, I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to help me, but you did, and I'll never forget that." She meant every word. In a few hours, this stranger had shown her more genuine kindness than she had experienced in years. "You don't need to thank me," William replied, but Sarah could see that her words meant something to him. "Just promise me you'll be patient with yourself as you heal. Rebuilding a life takes time, and there will be days when you feel like giving up. But you're stronger than you know, and you deserve every good thing that's coming your way." Sarah nodded, feeling slightly more ready to face whatever lay ahead. She gathered her backpack and stepped out of the car, then turned back toward William one more time. Would it be okay if I called you sometime? Just to let you know how things are going?" She hoped she wasn't overstepping, but William had become her first ally in this new life, and the thought of losing that connection felt overwhelming. William smiled and reached into his wallet, pulling out a simple business card. "William Harrison," it read, with a phone number written in neat handwriting. "I'd be honored to hear from you whenever you're ready." As Sarah took the card, she noticed his hands were weathered but clean, the hands of someone who worked honestly for a living and took pride in doing good work. Walking toward the entrance of the shelter, Sarah felt William's presence behind her like a protective shield. She knew he was waiting to make sure she got inside safely before driving away, another small gesture that demonstrated his genuine care for her well-being. At the door, she turned and waved, and he waved back with an encouraging smile. The lobby of New Beginnings was everything the exterior had promised: warm, welcoming, and designed to feel more like a home than an institution. The woman at the reception desk looked up as Sarah entered, and her expression immediately softened with understanding and compassion. "Hello, dear," the receptionist said gently. "I'm Patricia. Are you here to speak with someone about our services?" Her voice carried no judgment, only kindness, and Sarah felt some of her tension begin to ease. "Yes," Sarah said quietly. I need help." The words felt strange coming out of her mouth after years of Marcus convincing her that needing help was a sign of weakness. But here, in this place designed specifically for women like her, asking for help felt like an act of courage rather than failure. Patricia nodded and reached for a clipboard with some basic paperwork. "Of course, honey. We're here to help, and you're in a safe place now. Our intake coordinator will want to speak with you. But first, let's get you settled with a cup of tea and let you catch your breath." She gestured toward a comfortable seating area where other women sat, reading or talking quietly. As Patricia made a phone call to summon the intake coordinator, Sarah looked around at the other residents. There was a woman about her own age reading a novel, a teenager working on what looked like homework, and an older woman knitting while keeping an eye on two young children playing with blocks. These women looked normal, like people she might encounter anywhere, and Sarah realized that domestic violence truly did cross all boundaries of age, race, and social class. The intake coordinator, a woman named Lisa with kind eyes and a professional but warm demeanor, appeared within minutes. "Sarah?" she asked, and Sarah nodded. "I'm Lisa, and I'm here to help you through our intake process. Would you like to come to my office where we can talk privately?" Lisa's office was decorated with plants and soft artwork, designed to feel calming rather than clinical. As they settled into comfortable chairs, Lisa explained the process in simple, non-threatening terms. "We'll need to gather some basic information about your situation so we can best help you," she said. "But we'll go at your pace, and you can take breaks whenever you need them." For the next hour, Sarah found herself telling her story to someone who listened without judgment or interruption. Lisa asked thoughtful questions that helped Sarah articulate things she had never put into words before, like the gradual escalation of Marcus's controlling behavior and the way he had systematically isolated her from her support system. "You've been incredibly brave," Lisa said when Sarah finished her account. "Leaving an abusive relationship is one of the hardest things a person can do, and you should be proud of yourself for taking this step." Her words echoed what William had told her earlier, and Sarah began to believe that maybe they were right. Over the following days, Sarah began to settle into the routine of life at New Beginnings. The shelter operated more like a supportive community than an institution, with residents sharing responsibilities for cooking, cleaning, and childcare. Sarah found comfort in the structure and purpose these tasks provided, giving her something productive to focus on while she processed the enormous changes in her life. Her roommate was Maria, a soft-spoken woman in her 30s, who had arrived at the shelter 3 weeks earlier with her 2 young daughters. Maria's English was limited, but the 2 women communicated through gestures, shared smiles, and the universal language of women who had survived similar traumas. In the evenings, Sarah would help Maria's daughters with their homework, while Maria taught her basic Spanish phrases. The shelter provided more than just temporary housing. During her first week, Sarah met with a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery, attended a support group for domestic violence survivors, and worked with a case manager to develop a plan for achieving long-term independence. Each service felt like another piece of the foundation she was building for her new life. The support group meetings were held twice a week in a circle of folding chairs in the shelter's community room. Sarah had been nervous about her first meeting, uncertain about sharing her story with strangers. But she quickly discovered that the other women understood her experiences in ways that people outside the situation Never could. When she spoke about the way Marcus had convinced her that his jealousy was proof of his love, heads nodded around the circle in recognition. He used to tell me I was lucky he put up with me, shared Rebecca, a woman in her 40s, who had left her husband after 20 years of marriage. He made me believe I was too old, too fat, too stupid for anyone else to want me. Rebecca's story resonated deeply with Sarah, who recognized the same patterns of psychological manipulation in her own relationship. The group facilitator, a licensed therapist named Dr. Anderson, helped the women identify these common tactics used by abusers: isolation, financial control, emotional manipulation, and gradual erosion of self-esteem, she explained. These are tools designed to make you dependent and compliant. Recognizing them is the first step toward healing. Sarah found herself looking forward to these meetings, not because she enjoyed reliving painful memories, but because each session helped her understand that Marcus's treatment of her said nothing about her worth as a person and everything about his need to control and dominate. The other women's stories of survival and recovery gave her hope for her own future. Between counseling sessions and support group meetings, Sarah began exploring practical steps toward independence. The shelter's job placement coordinator helped her update her resume, which had grown thin during her years with Marcus, who had discouraged her from working outside the home. Sarah had a bachelor's degree in communications and several years of experience in marketing before she met Marcus, but her confidence in her professional abilities had been thoroughly undermined. Your education doesn't disappear just because you haven't used it for a while, the job coordinator assured her. And employers understand that people sometimes take breaks from their careers for personal reasons. The key is to present your experience confidently and focus on the skills you've maintained. Sarah spent hours in the shelter's computer lab, relearning software programs that had evolved during her absence from the workforce and researching potential employers in the area. The process felt overwhelming at first, but gradually she began to remember the professional competence she had once possessed. Each small success, like successfully formatting her resume or writing a compelling cover letter, felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that Marcus had tried to erase. 3 weeks after arriving at the shelter, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. Patricia from the front desk approached her during dinner with a smile and a message that someone named William Harrison was asking to speak with her. Sarah's heart jumped with a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she realized this was the first time since leaving Marcus that someone from outside the shelter had reached out to her personally. Sarah? William's familiar voice was warm with genuine concern. I hope you don't mind me calling. I've been thinking about you and wondering how you're settling in. His call felt like a gift, a reminder that she had connections beyond the walls of the shelter. I'm doing well, Sarah said, and realized she meant it. Better than I expected, actually. The people here are wonderful, and I'm starting to feel like myself again. She found herself smiling as she spoke, something that would have been impossible just a few weeks earlier. I'm glad to hear that, William said, and Sarah could hear his relief. I wanted you to know that I mentioned your situation to my daughter Emma, the teacher I told you about. She runs a literacy program at the community center downtown, and she's looking for volunteers. It's flexible schedule, and she thought it might be a good way for you to ease back into working while you're getting back on your feet. The offer caught Sarah off guard. She had been focusing so intently on basic survival that she hadn't considered volunteer work as a stepping stone back to employment. But as William described the program, which helped adults improve their reading skills to pursue better job opportunities, Sarah felt a spark of genuine interest. Would you like me to set up a meeting? William asked. No pressure, of course. Emma just thought your communications background might be helpful, and she's always looking for people who understand what it's like to rebuild their lives. The last comment suggested that Emma knew more about Sarah's situation than William had initially revealed, but his discretion felt protective rather than invasive. "I think I'd like that," Sarah said, surprising herself with how quickly she made the decision. A few weeks ago, the thought of committing to any kind of regular obligation would have terrified her. Now, the idea of doing meaningful work that helped other people felt like a natural next step in her recovery. After they hung up, Sarah realized that William's call represented something significant. He had remembered her, thought about her well-being, and taken action to help her move forward. In her relationship with Marcus, she had been isolated from anyone who truly cared about her welfare. Now, she was beginning to build a network of people who wanted to see her succeed. Emma Harrison turned out to be as warm and genuine as her father, with an infectious enthusiasm for her literacy work that immediately put Sarah at ease. They met at the community center on a Thursday morning, and Emma gave Sarah a tour of the facility while explaining the program's mission and methods. "We work with adults who want to improve their reading skills for various reasons," Emma explained as they walked through the bright, cheerful classroom. "Some are preparing for their GED, others are hoping to advance in their current jobs, and some just want to be able to help their children with homework." The walls were decorated with inspirational quotes and student success stories, creating an atmosphere of hope and achievement. Sarah was impressed by the program's approach, which focused on practical literacy skills rather than academic theory. Students worked on reading materials relevant to their goals, whether that meant job applications, medical forms, or children's books. The individualized approach reminded Sarah of her own journey at the shelter, where each woman's path to independence was respected and supported. "My father mentioned you have a background in communications," Emma said as they settled in her office. "I think you'd be particularly good at helping students with writing skills. So many of our participants struggle with expressing themselves clearly on paper, and that can be a real barrier to employment." Emma's observation resonated with Sarah, who remembered how Marcus had criticized her writing and communication skills until she had stopped trusting her own voice. The volunteer orientation was scheduled for the following week, but Emma invited Sarah to observe a few classes before making her final decision. Sarah accepted eagerly, curious to see the program in action, and excited about the possibility of contributing something meaningful to her community. Her first observation session was with a group of 4 adults working on job application skills. The instructor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Rodriguez, guided the students through the process of translating their life experiences into professional language. Sarah watched as a man who had worked construction for 15 years struggled to articulate his leadership experience on paper, despite clearly possessing the skills employers would value. "I just don't know how to make it sound important," he said, frustrated with his draft cover letter. "I mean, I've supervised crews and managed projects, but when I write it down, it sounds like nothing." Sarah found herself wanting to help, to show him how to frame his experience in terms that would highlight his capabilities. During the break, Mrs. Rodriguez approached Sarah. "Emma mentioned you might be joining our volunteer team. Are you finding the work interesting?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically, explaining how impressed she was with the program's practical approach and supportive atmosphere. "We really need someone with your background," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "So many of our students have rich life experiences and valuable skills, but they struggle to communicate that effectively to potential employers. Having someone who understands marketing and communication could make a real difference in their success." The second class Sarah observed focused on family literacy, with parents working to improve their reading skills so they could better support their children's education. She watched a young mother sound out words in a picture book, her face lighting up as she successfully read a complete page to her 4-year-old daughter. The child's obvious pride in her mother's accomplishment brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "That's my mom," the little girl announced to anyone who would listen. "She's learning to read just like me." The pure joy in both mother and daughter's faces reminded Sarah of the ripple effects of education and empowerment. When adults improved their literacy skills, Their entire families benefited. After observing several classes, Sarah felt certain that volunteering with the literacy program was exactly what she needed. The work would allow her to use her professional skills in a meaningful way while building her confidence and expanding her social network. Most importantly, it would give her a sense of purpose beyond her own recovery. She called Emma that evening to accept the volunteer position. "I'm so glad," Emma said warmly. "I have a feeling you're going to be wonderful at this work. There's something special about people who've overcome significant challenges themselves. They bring a level of empathy and understanding that's really valuable." Emma's comment made Sarah realize that her experiences with Marcus, as painful as they had been, might actually help her connect with students who were facing their own obstacles. She could understand what it felt like to have your confidence systematically undermined, to doubt your own abilities, and to struggle with rebuilding your sense of self-worth. The volunteer orientation took place the following Saturday, and Sarah arrived early, nervous but excited about this new chapter in her recovery. She had chosen her outfit carefully, wanting to look professional but approachable. For the first time in years, she was dressing for herself and her own goals, rather than to avoid Marcus's criticism. The other volunteers were a diverse group of retirees, college students, and working professionals who donated their time to the literacy program. During introductions, Sarah shared that she was excited to use her communications background to help students achieve their goals. She didn't mention her personal circumstances, but several volunteers approached her afterward to share their own stories of career transitions and personal challenges. "I started volunteering here after my divorce," confided Janet, a woman in her 50s who worked as a bank manager during the week. "I needed something positive to focus on while I rebuilt my life, and helping other people learn turned out to be exactly what I needed." Her story resonated with Sarah, who was beginning to understand that recovery often involved finding ways to help others while healing yourself. By the end of the orientation, Sarah felt like she was part of a community united by the shared goal of empowering others through education. She was assigned to work with Mrs. Rodriguez 2 mornings a week, focusing on helping students with written communication skills. The structure and purpose felt like another solid foundation stone in the life she was building. Walking back to the shelter after orientation, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. She was no longer the frightened woman who had fled her apartment with 5 crumpled bills. She was becoming someone who could contribute meaningfully to her community, someone whose experiences and skills had value beyond her relationship to any man. Sarah's first day as a literacy volunteer brought a mixture of nervousness and excitement that reminded her of starting a new job. She arrived at the community center early, wanting to review the materials Mrs. Rodriguez had given her and prepare for meeting her first students. The classroom was quiet in the early morning light, with motivational posters and student work samples creating an atmosphere of encouragement and possibility. Her first student was James, the construction worker she had observed during her initial visit. He greeted her with a firm handshake and a shy smile, clearly anxious about working with someone new, but determined to improve his writing skills. As they settled at a small table with his draft cover letter, Sarah could see the intelligence and capability in his eyes, despite his struggles with written expression. "I know what I want to say," James explained, pointing to his handwritten notes. "I just can't make it sound right on paper. My wife keeps telling me I'm smarter than I think, but writing makes me feel stupid." His honesty reminded Sarah of her own struggles with self-doubt, the way Marcus had convinced her that her thoughts and opinions weren't worth expressing. "Writing is a skill like any other," Sarah assured him, settling into her role as teacher and mentor. "The fact that you can manage construction projects and lead teams shows you can organize complex information and communicate effectively. We just need to translate those skills to paper." As she spoke, she realized she was talking to herself as much as to James, rebuilding her own confidence alongside his. They spent the next hour working through his cover letter paragraph by paragraph, with Sarah helping James identify the leadership and problem-solving skills embedded in his work experience. She watched his posture straighten and his voice grow stronger as he began to see his background through a more professional lens. By the end of the session, his letter clearly articulated his qualifications for a supervisory position he was hoping to pursue. "This sounds like someone I'd want to hire," James said, reading through the final draft with obvious pride. "I can't believe this is my experience written down." His amazement reminded Sarah of her own journey toward recognizing her worth and capabilities. Helping James see his value was helping her remember her own. Her second student that morning was Maria Elena, a woman in her 40s who was working toward her GED while managing a house-cleaning business. Maria Elena's English was excellent, but she struggled with organizing her thoughts in writing, particularly for the essay portions of her practice tests. As they worked together, Sarah discovered that Maria Elena had fascinating insights about economics and social issues, drawn from her experiences as an immigrant entrepreneur. "I understand how small businesses work because I built one from nothing," Maria Elena explained as they discussed a practice essay about economic opportunity. "But when I try to write about it, I don't know how to make my ideas sound important." Sarah helped her structure her thoughts and find academic language to express her real-world knowledge, watching Maria Elena's confidence grow as she realized her experiences gave her unique insights worth sharing. Between her morning volunteer sessions and afternoon activities at the shelter, Sarah found herself energized in ways she hadn't experienced in years. The work was challenging and meaningful, requiring her to draw on skills she had feared were permanently damaged. Each successful session with a student felt like proof that she was capable of more than Marcus had convinced her to believe. After several weeks of volunteering, Emma approached Sarah with an interesting proposition. "The community center is applying for a grant to expand our literacy program," she explained over coffee in the center's small cafe. "We need someone to help write the proposal, and I immediately thought of you. Your communications background and your understanding of our students' needs would be invaluable." The grant writing project represented a significant step forward for Sarah. It would require her to work independently, manage deadlines, and produce professional quality writing that would be reviewed by Foundation officials. The old Sarah would have immediately assumed she wasn't qualified for such responsibility, but her weeks of rebuilding confidence had changed her perspective. "I'd love to help," Sarah said, surprising herself with how quickly she accepted the challenge. "What's the timeline, and what kind of support would I have?" Her questions were practical and professional, the kind of clarifications she would have asked in her previous career. She was thinking like a capable professional again. Emma outlined the project requirements, a 20-page proposal due in 6 weeks, with sections covering program description, community need, budget justification, and evaluation methods. Sarah would work closely with Emma and the center's director, but the primary writing responsibility would be hers. The grant, if successful, would fund expansion of the literacy program and create a part-time paid position for a program coordinator. "I should mention," Emma added with a meaningful look, "that we'd want the program coordinator to be someone who really understands our mission and has experience working with our student population. Someone like you, if you were interested in a more permanent role here." The implication was clear. This grant writing project could lead to a real job opportunity. That evening, Sarah called William to share her news about the grant writing opportunity. His enthusiasm and pride were evident in his voice as she described the project and its potential impact on her future. "I'm not surprised they asked you to take this on," he said warmly. "Emma's been telling me how impressed everyone is with your work with the students." "I'm nervous about it," Sarah admitted. "It's been so long since I've written anything substantial, and there's a lot riding on this grant." She was being honest about her fears, while also recognizing how different this nervousness felt from the anxiety she had lived with during her relationship with Marcus. This was productive anxiety, the kind that came from taking on meaningful challenges rather than walking on eggshells. "You know," William said thoughtfully, "I've been driving these routes for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of people going through tough transitions. The ones who succeed aren't the ones who never feel nervous. They're the ones who feel nervous but do the work anyway. You're exactly where you need to be." His words settled into Sarah's heart like an anchor, grounding her in the reality of how far she had already come. 3 months ago, she had been a woman with $5 and no prospects. Now she was someone trusted with important work that could impact her entire community. The transformation felt almost miraculous, but she was beginning to understand that it was really the result of consistent daily choices to believe in herself and accept help from others. The grant writing project consumed Sarah's attention over the next 6 weeks, challenging her in ways that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. She established a routine of working in the community center's quiet library each morning before her volunteer teaching sessions, spreading research materials and draft pages across a large table, while she crafted compelling arguments for the program's expansion. The process required her to dig deep into data about literacy rates, unemployment statistics, and the connection between education and economic mobility. As she researched, Sarah discovered that her own story was part of a much larger pattern of women whose economic dependence had trapped them in dangerous relationships. The statistics were sobering, but they also reinforced the importance of the work she was doing. Emma proved to be an invaluable collaborator, providing insights about the program's history and helping Sarah understand what foundations were looking for in successful proposals. Their working relationship felt natural and comfortable, with Emma offering guidance while trusting Sarah's professional judgment about language and presentation. It had been years since Sarah had experienced this kind of collegial respect. "Your writing really captures the heart of what we're trying to accomplish," Emma told her after reviewing the first draft of the needs assessment section. "You've managed to present the data clearly while keeping the focus on real people and their dreams. That's exactly what we need." Her feedback reminded Sarah of the satisfaction she had once found in professional writing, the sense of using language to inform and persuade. The budget section proved particularly challenging, requiring Sarah to work closely with the center's financial manager to understand program costs and justify each expense category. She found herself drawing on math skills she hadn't used in years, double-checking calculations, and creating spreadsheets that presented complex information in accessible formats. Each completed section felt like evidence of capabilities Marcus had convinced her she didn't possess. Midway through the project, Sarah experienced a setback that tested her newly rebuilt confidence. She had been working on the evaluation methodology section when her computer crashed, taking with it several hours of unsaved work. Her first reaction was panic, followed by the familiar voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like Marcus telling her she was incompetent and careless. But instead of spiraling into self-criticism, Sarah took a deep breath and called Emma for advice about data recovery. Together, they were able to retrieve most of the lost work, and Emma helped Sarah set up automatic backup systems to prevent future problems. The incident became a learning experience rather than a catastrophe, and Sarah realized how much her relationship with mistakes and setbacks had changed. "A few months ago, I would have seen this as proof that I can't handle important work," Sarah told Emma as they reviewed the recovered files. "Now, I can see it as just a technical problem with a practical solution." Emma smiled at the observation, recognizing it as evidence of Sarah's growing resilience and self-compassion. The final week before the grant deadline was intense, with Sarah working longer hours to polish every section and ensure all requirements were met. She found herself energized rather than exhausted by the challenge, fueled by a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since before she met Marcus. The work felt meaningful in a way that went beyond her personal recovery, contributing to something larger than herself. Dr. Anderson, her counselor at the shelter, noticed the change in Sarah's demeanor during their weekly sessions. "You're carrying yourself differently," she observed. "There's a confidence in your posture and voice that's been building over the past few weeks. How are you feeling about yourself these days?" The question prompted Sarah to reflect on her internal transformation. "I feel like I'm remembering who I used to be," Sarah said slowly, "but also becoming someone new. The woman who left Marcus was running away from something. The woman writing this grant proposal is running towards something." The distinction felt important, marking a shift from survival mode to active life building. As the grant deadline approached, Sarah realized she needed to make some decisions about her long-term plans. Her time at the shelter was always intended to be temporary, and she had been working with her case manager to explore housing options and employment opportunities. The potential program coordinator position at the community center represented a concrete path forward, but it also required her to commit to staying in the area rather than starting over somewhere completely new. She spent a long evening walking through the city neighborhoods she had come to know, thinking about what kind of life she wanted to build and where she wanted to build it. The area around the community center felt like home in a way that surprised her, filled with people and places that had become part of her recovery story. William's bus route, the cafe where he had bought her coffee, the shelter that had provided safety and support, these had become landmarks in her new geography of belonging. The grant proposal was submitted on a Thursday morning, exactly 6 weeks after Sarah had begun working on it. As she clicked the submit button on the foundation's online portal, she felt a mixture of accomplishment and nervous anticipation. The project had required her to stretch beyond her comfort zone, but it had also reminded her of her professional capabilities and passion for meaningful work. "Regardless of whether we get the grant," Emma told her after the submission was complete, "this project has been incredibly valuable. You've produced beautiful work, and you've shown everyone here what you're capable of accomplishing." Her words carried the weight of professional recognition, the kind of feedback Sarah had been craving without realizing it. That evening, Sarah called William to share the news about completing the grant proposal. His pride and excitement were evident in his voice as she described the project's scope and her hopes for its success. "Emma's been keeping me updated," he admitted, "and she's consistently impressed by your work. Whatever happens with the grant, you should know that you've already succeeded in ways that matter." As they talked, Sarah realized that William had become more than just the kind stranger who had helped her in a crisis. He had become a friend, someone who celebrated her victories and supported her through challenges. Their relationship represented something she had never experienced with Marcus: friendship based on mutual respect rather than control and dependence. 3 weeks after submitting the grant proposal, Sarah received a call that would change her life trajectory once again. Emma's voice was filled with excitement as she delivered the news. The foundation had approved their grant request in full, funding the literacy program expansion for 3 years and creating the program coordinator position they had envisioned. They specifically mentioned the quality of the proposal in their feedback, Emma told her during an impromptu celebration meeting at the community center. The foundation representative said it was one of the most compelling applications they had received, particularly the way it connected statistical needs with individual success stories. Sarah felt a surge of professional pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion of her worth. The program coordinator position came with a salary that would allow Sarah to afford her own apartment, benefits that included health insurance and professional development opportunities, and the chance to expand the literacy program's reach into underserved communities throughout the city. It represented everything she had hoped for when she first fled Marcus's control: independence, meaningful work, and financial security. During her final week at the shelter, Sarah reflected on the transformation that had taken place over the past 4 months. The frightened woman who had arrived with $5 and a backpack full of fear had evolved into someone who could envision and work toward a stable, purposeful future. The change felt gradual and dramatic simultaneously, like watching a sunrise that happens slowly, but results in a completely transformed landscape. Her farewell dinner at the shelter was attended by current residents, staff members, and several women who had graduated from the program and returned to visit. As Sarah listened to the stories shared around the table, she realized that her journey was part of a much larger narrative of women reclaiming their lives and building new foundations for themselves and their families. "You came here looking for safety," Dr. Anderson said during the informal ceremony. "But you've given us so much more than you've received. Your willingness to help other women, to share your skills and insights, has enriched our entire community." Her words reminded Sarah that healing often happened through service to others, that her own recovery had been strengthened by her commitment to helping fellow survivors. Maria, her former roommate, presented Sarah with a small photo album containing pictures from their time together at the shelter. The images captured moments Sarah hadn't realized were being documented, teaching Maria's daughters to braid friendship bracelets, laughing over a cooking disaster in the community kitchen, working together on job applications at the computer lab. The photos told the story of a friendship that had transcended language barriers and provided mutual support during a difficult transition. On her last morning at the shelter, Sarah packed her belongings into 2 suitcases and a box of books, a stark contrast to the single backpack she had arrived with. The additional possessions weren't just material accumulations. They represented relationships, opportunities, and a growing sense of permanence in her new life. Each item had a story connected to her recovery and rebuilding process. William arrived to help her move to her new apartment, a 1-bedroom unit within walking distance of the community center. As they loaded her belongings into his car, Sarah marveled at how their relationship had evolved from a moment of crisis assistance to a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. He had become the kind of person she could call when she needed advice, someone who celebrated her successes without taking credit for them. The apartment was small but filled with natural light, with hardwood floors and large windows that overlooked a tree-lined street. As Sarah arranged her few pieces of furniture and hung pictures on the walls, she felt a sense of ownership and belonging that she had never experienced, even during her years with Marcus. This space was entirely hers, a reflection of her choices and preferences rather than someone else's control. Emma stopped by that evening with a housewarming gift, a beautiful desk lamp, and a card signed by all the literacy program volunteers and students. "For all the important writing you'll do in your new home," the card read, acknowledging both her professional role and her personal journey. The gesture reminded Sarah that she was now part of a community that valued her contributions and cared about her well-being. 6 months later, Sarah stood before a room full of community leaders and foundation representatives, presenting the first quarterly report on the expanded literacy program. The statistics were impressive. Enrollment had doubled, student completion rates had improved significantly, and several participants had achieved major goals like earning their GED or securing better employment. But the numbers only told part of the story. "What makes this program successful," Sarah told her audience, "isn't just the curriculum or the teaching methods. It's the understanding that everyone who walks through our doors has valuable knowledge and experience, even if they struggle with traditional academic skills. Our role is to help them recognize and articulate their capabilities." As she spoke, she thought about James, who had been promoted to project manager, and Maria Elena, who was now studying for her real estate license. After the presentation, William approached her with his familiar warm smile. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, and Sarah knew he meant more than just her professional presentation. He was acknowledging the entire journey from that morning at the bus stop to this moment of confidence and accomplishment. "I couldn't have done any of this without your kindness that first day," Sarah replied, meaning every word. "You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and you helped me believe that I deserved better." Their conversation was interrupted by Emma, who wanted to introduce Sarah to other community organization leaders who were interested in collaborating on future projects. As Sarah engaged in discussions about expanding literacy services and developing new community partnerships, she realized that her story had come full circle in an unexpected way. She was now the person offering hope and practical assistance to others facing difficult transitions, just as William had done for her. The $5 in her backpack had grown into something far more valuable: a life built on purpose, connection, and the knowledge that everyone deserved compassion and second chances. Standing in that room full of people working to improve their community, Sarah understood that her journey was both uniquely personal and universally human. The bus driver who had helped her wasn't actually a millionaire in the traditional sense, but his wealth of kindness and wisdom had proven more valuable than money. And in learning to help others while rebuilding her own life, Sarah had discovered that she possessed riches of her own to share. The story that had begun with an escape had transformed into a homecoming, not to a place she had known before, but to a version of herself she was still becoming. Every day brought new opportunities to grow, to contribute, and to remember that even in the darkest moments, there were always people willing to extend a hand and help light the way forward. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments on a scale from 0 to 10. What's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories, and check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.